You know, the more I start thinking about it, the more I realize that I can't even remember the last time that I made a video where I just turned my mic on like in the old days when I was first starting and I just told the story straight out of my heart without thinking about things or, overcomplicating things for myself. At the moment, I was like, okay, what video do I make? And I was over here like doing some research because the recent videos haven't been doing that well. And I'm like, all right, like let's see what the people want to see. And the more that I was sitting there, I was just like, I don't really want to make any of this until I was like, you know what? There's that one commission video that I have to do that I still hadn't gotten to, which was a lava quirk Deku. And I was like, yo, that's actually a sick idea. So I figured, let's take things back a bit and just make a raw, unfiltered video where I'm not going to be pausing and stopping or heavily even editing the video. I mean, for crying out loud, the intro, I'm probably not even going to edit. Some of you guys might think it's an excuse for me to be lazy, and to be honest, it is for the intro. But for the video itself, it's actually going to be a bit fun to figure out how Deku's going to grow up, how things are going to go for the arcs. Which, speaking of the arcs, I actually need to pull up the MHA timeline to make sure that I don't get things wrong. So let me go ahead and do that. Wait, I typed it wrong. I put .MHA timeline. All right, there. MHA timeline. Now we got the entire world of events. So now I kind of got to start thinking, okay, Lava Quirk Deku. What should his background be? How should he get his quirk? I was thinking of like potentially doing like a really gruesome start for Deku where he's born with his quirk, and because his body is made out of lava, he comes out as a molten baby, literally like melting through his mother's womb and just like killing her on day one, which would have been like a crazy dark story. But I'm just like, yo, like Xehther, like chill out. Like let's not go down that path, right? We don't want villain Deku over here. Or at least not for today, right? Maybe it would make for a cool villain Deku, but who knows? Point is, I was thinking that we should probably go down the path of like Nizuku, who was pretty much given up for adoption once he was born. And the reason for this isn't going to be something dark or anything like that, but straight up, Inko and Iyashi in this timeline basically ended up having a big no-no mistake way earlier than they do in the original, which means that they're kind of super unprepared for everything. And once Inko had the baby, her parents made her give him away to the adoption system. So Izuku's going to be growing up amongst a bunch of kids, and though he's going to be having an incredible quirk like off rip, even as a small child, Deku had properties that were just different. His body functions were strange. Izuku's body was made out of literal magma or lava, whatever you really want to call it. And so people thought that his quirk was cool, but it was also very dangerous. And whenever people as a young child, Izuku would like be like, oh, like let's get him, like he's pretty cute, like he's like a nice, like cute kid, and he seems like he's gonna have like potential to grow up and maybe even has a cool quirk. But when they find out what Deku's quirk is and they realize that he causes some troubles around the home sometimes, whenever he loses control, he might melt through furniture or accidentally melt spoons and stuff like that. The people would kind of be thrown off by that. And it wouldn't really help that the other people around Izuku would kind of bully him about that, being like, look at you, Izuku, such a cool quirk, but you can't even control it. You might as well be quirkless because nobody wants you even with that villainous quirk. And after a kid finally tells him that, everybody starts kind of saying, yeah, you're right. His quirk melts things. That's such a villain quirk. And so people start pretty much being mean to Deku and calling him a villain. And they're like, you have such a villainous quirk? You want to be a hero? Don't make us laugh, Izuku. You're going to be nothing but a no-good villain one day, probably robbing banks or something to survive. That is if you make it that far. And people would just make fun of Deku, so even though he was very strong, Deku couldn't exactly do anything against them with his quirk for fear of straight up killing them. And if he was to try to fight them physically without his quirk, well, all of a sudden things get kind of iffy. Because even though they couldn't quite hurt him, because at punching him, his body would turn to literal magma, and they could straight up melt their own hands or cause very serious injuries to themselves, that meant that Deku was kind of like a black sheep in the entire orphanage. So by the time that he would pretty much make it to middle school or elementary school, Deku would still find himself as a bit of an outcast role. People making fun of him for his orphan status, for not having parents, and Izuku would feel very lonely as he grows up. But there was one thing that he could always depend on: his quirk. The thing that everybody seemed to call him a villain for was the very thing that Izuku had relied on these whole entire years to keep himself sane. Well, if everybody called him a villain, then he was gonna just have to prove them wrong. And so, Izuku would train on his ability, eventually learning by the time that he would make it to middle school to control his temperature outputtage, not necessarily making the lava cold per se, but kind of learning how to not burn everything whenever he touches it, which is not something that always happens, but it was something that happened a lot while he was a young child. He'd accidentally melt through his clothes, melt through his bed. There was one time that Izuku was on top of a bunk bed, because that's how their layout was. Like, it was just a bunch of bunk beds in one room for maximum efficiency, and Izuku melted through the top bunk, landing on a kid below with the little bits and pieces of magma, like kind of dropping on the kid's leg and burning him, which, you know, definitely did not make the kid like him. Matter of fact, let's not make it a kid, let's make it a girl. So that was like his crush, and then she didn't like him because he like burned her and gave her like a small, right, permanent scar. So Izuku's love life was also being affected by his quirk. But I digress. He gets to middle school, and I'm going to be saying that he's going to be going to the same exact middle school that we have Kirishima and Mina both going to. And while Izuku would be there at that school, he would essentially have controlled his quirk a lot better, learning how to create like animal-like things with his quirk. One idea that Deku had always had was to essentially shoot his arm out similarly to a hero that is not very well known, but has such a cool power. His name is Snatch, and he possesses the ability to transform his sand-like arms into capture weapons. But Izuku realized that he couldn't exactly use his magma for capturing people because he could straight up kill them, you know? So he figured maybe he could use it for offensive purposes. And so Izuku would attempt to create dragons out of his arm that shoot towards you and like kind of like hit you quickly and like go away so that they don't fully kill you. So as Izuku would be trying to do this, he would start to create like these weird little tendril-like arms out of both like appendages, but he quickly goes on to realize that it's so hard to manipulate the actual structure of the lava itself. Whenever he would try to extend his arms in a specific way, the lava just wouldn't work with him, and it would give him an extremely hard time, with it always seeming to look like those poorly made like realistic cakes. Have you guys ever seen like some of those like really bad ones? That's kind of what Izuku's little dragon like lava creation would kind of look like. And when it comes to anything else that Izuku could do, he had discovered that he had the ability to essentially transform his body to lava on command, which is what was happening all those years. And after mastering this, it's going to be awesome for Izuku, because say somebody was to shoot him with a bullet, Izuku transforming his body into lava could actually cause the bullet to go straight through him without causing him any physical pain. He would also start to work on a technique where he's essentially turning his body into little magma rocks to be able to throw them at people. And thanks to his body being made out of literal lava, he doesn't get any recoil from holding it, nor does fire do anything to him because it's not going to be having any effect on Izuku. So as Izuku would get older and older, he would finally start to gain more and more confidence, but due to the fact that people had always kind of left him alone, he would kind of develop this sort of like loner-like personality, where he doesn't talk to you unless you talk to him first, and he's actually a chill guy, but people don't give him the chance to show that. If I could what's the word I'm looking for? Compare him to somebody, I think that the best comparison would probably be Aizawa, which is going to be pretty funny considering he's going to be going to UA quite soon, and he's going to be joining exactly that class. So let's cut to that. Or wait, no, actually, let's not do that, because I forgot to cover anything that happens during Izuku's middle school years. Once Izuku would make his way towards the middle school section of his life, this is where Izuku would finally meet somebody who he pretty much ends up making his best friend. And that person would be Mina Ashido. No, I'm totally kidding. It's actually going to be Kirishima. And the reason that I think that this is going to be working is because of Kirishima's nature that he had while he was in middle school, because he wasn't exactly the red-haired person that we all know and love, but back then he was kind of more of a scaredy cat and unsure of his quirk, because obviously he had hardening, but it was like a way weaker version of the one we get in the anime. We see this in, what was it, like the overhaul season, I think it was, so like season 5, 6, one of the two. But regardless, once Izuku would go on to meet Kirishima, he would pretty much end up meeting Izuku only because he ended up discovering what Izuku's quirk was. And so this would be like one of the first people that ever goes up to Deku and would be like, dude, you have a lava quirk? That's incredible. So as Izuku would look up and see that this boy was praising him instead of calling him a villain, a slight smile would appear on his face. And it's at this point that Kirishima and Izuku would both start talking about things, kind of hitting it off. Kirishima being more of like the louder of the two, but still both of them aren't exactly like obnoxious loudmouths. And this would eventually lead to a friendship development developing where Izuku discovers Kirishima's quirk after being like, yeah, and you have a hardening quirk, don't you? So this is where the both of them would be like, wait, could we maybe help each other out? So Izuku would ask Kirishima if he could handle one of his punches, and then it'd be at this point that Izuku's hand would turn into like molten lava, similar to what we get in the thumbnail if the art for this video is done by then, because I had like a really cool thumbnail art concept, which I really want to know what you guys think about. That is probably going to be used for the thumbnail, but if not, sorry about that. But anyways, like he would turn his fist into like a lava-like substance and then punch at Kirishima. And his hardening at this point is so weak that it just doesn't have the desired effect, but it definitely helped him tank it. Thanks to his hardening aspects, he wasn't able to get burned much like other people, and it didn't affect him as much. So when Izuku realized that Kirishima could actually take the burn, he'd be like, that's incredible. Your quirk, it's so awesome. And Kirishima would be like, yeah, I guess. He's like, that's still packed heck of a punch. And Izuku just looks at him and he's like, yeah, but dude, you're still standing and you didn't even get burned that much. And Kirishima, noticing that his hardening actually did a lot more than he had expected, would be like, wait, am I getting stronger? And Izuku would be like, well, there's only one way to get your quirk stronger, right? Wouldn't it be to sustain more damage? Kirishima, hearing that, would be like, wait, you're right. I could probably harden myself by taking more damage. He's like, and then he would look at Izuku and be like, dude, can you please use your quirk against me? And I can harden myself. We could do this every day after school. And this way you can practice punching people and maybe making it so that your attacks don't fully burn me or something. We can work on the details later, but for now, maybe this could be a way to get myself stronger. I could finally stand shoulder to shoulder with someone like you. And we would then turn to see Izuku just kind of like nodding and be like, sure, man, like there's no doubt in my mind that with this training, we're both going to be incredible heroes. So for the foreseeable future, Kirishima and Izuku would do this training every day after school, leading Kirishima to developing a different personality, but still, once the day would come where Kirishima would encounter Gigantomachia, and he would have that moment, Izuku wouldn't be around, and so he would still be terrified looking at the beast in front of him, knowing that if he tried going toe-to-toe with that thing, as cool as his quirk is, he's gonna die. Because at this point in the story, Kirishima already has unlocked Red Riot Unbreakable, that ability where he's able to like turn his hardening way better. But the main thing that Kirishima has access to isn't necessarily like damage, so his hardening, but heat resistance. After years, and I do mean years, of taking lava molten attacks, Kirishima's durability would just be off the roof, and the time that he can remain in this state would be absolutely bizarre. So by the time that we would get to the time of the UA entrance exams, and him and Kirishima would both make their way inside and take the test, Izuku would give Kirishima a thumbs up, wishing him luck, with Kirishima saying, good luck out there, man, don't disappoint, as we would then pretty much have both of them going in there, taking their tests, and finally having them outside in the robot portion. Kirishima would do significantly better thanks to his quirk improving, but Izuku would be the one shocking everybody. From both arms, suddenly lava hound like dragon things would rush towards the direction of the robots, and Izuku would cause these molten like attacks like dragons to just absolutely devour every single one of the robot pointers. As we would have Izuku even using a different attack, where he's essentially able to like reel his arm back, cover it with molten lava, and extend it super far. So it kind of like covers a large area with like a lava-like attack. Izuku also has worked on this one move where he's essentially able to create like molten lava rocks, and he's able to essentially throw them super hard, which, you know, is hard enough to like hit something and just burn it, which definitely does more damage to humans, but it would still find some uses against these metal-like creatures, which is able to actually land on top of some robots and literally seep down into them, almost as though you would put like a ball that's been heated up on top of ice. It kind of just like melts through like shh. I don't know if you guys have seen those videos, but I digress. Point is, Kirishima and Izuku would both easily pass the test, and when the 0-pointer would finally come out and be unveiled that it's like about to crush Uraraka, Izuku would throw his hand out with a bunch of lava pouring over and quickly kind of like hardening. Izuku having discovered this ability to essentially regulate his temperature, not like regulate it, but to shoot out magma that essentially turns hardened the moment it kind of like builds like a structure that Izuku wants. So throwing it, Izuku would create like a wall of magma so that when the zero pointer would be about to crush him and Uraraka, the zero pointer would actually melt its foot off, with it toppling forward and Izuku asking Uraraka if she was okay. And so we would have like that scene where Izuku, like, he takes on a zero pointer to save somebody else, and he shows that he really can be a hero. All the things that people had said about him before, those people were out of their minds. Deku's gonna make for an incredible hero. So we would see Izuku and Uraraka having a nice interaction, and then we'd probably get some sort of scene with Izuku and Kirishima talking things over about how everything had went down, and like how excited Kirishima is to get into UA. Kind of like, well, I hope I don't jump the gun, but I'm pretty sure we both made it to UA, man. And Izuku just kind of be like, of course we did. We're a dynamic duo. And they both kind of like dap each other up, and they're like, so we hopping on Minecraft later? And Kirishima and Izuku just proceed to continue playing their Let's Play world. This is when we would jump cut to Izuku playing Clash Royale, and the dude is playing a Lava Hound deck. He puts the Lava Hound in the back, and the dude's like just playing the game, and he loses his fight. He's like, no, royal recruits, like he's just freaking out about the card. But I'm just including that part because of the name Lava Hound. You'll see later. Anyways, the point is, eventually, we would have everybody making their way to school for the first day, and when Izuku would enter the classroom, he would walk in with Kirishima. Izuku, noticing that that pink-haired girl is there, he would walk over to her and say, Mina, you're here too? And she would say, hey, you guys made it. And, you know, like, they talk for a little bit before, Eraserhead finally is all like, everybody be quiet. We could probably even see Uraraka going over to Izuku to thank him again, but before she could even speak a word, Aizawa would interrupt everything and be like, take a seat, you know what I mean? So then we kind of just jump cut to the classroom outside, about to take the Quirk apprehension test. And for this actual event, I just don't really know how Izuku's gonna perform in terms of like, is his Quirk really the best for these kinds of tests? Because think about it, we have the 50-meter dash, which Deku isn't exactly a speed type combatant, so he'd probably do pretty decent because there's no way he doesn't have like a physically well-built body. For the grip strength test, he could probably turn his hand into lava and like shatter it so that like he kind of like makes the metal that he's squeezing weaker, so he's able to just like crush it. So that would actually be kind of sick. He gets like the best score in that. The standing long jump, maybe Izuku could kind of like extend his legs out through like magma, kind of like Mr. Elastic, and jump over the entire sandbox. And the repeated side to side steps, well, he can't exactly do much there, but we would probably have him do pretty decent in the ball throw, at least when it comes to like the actual physical strength that he could output. He could maybe like turn the ball like into flames or something like that, like char a bit of it up so that it can go farther and weighs less, but I don't know. I don't really know what kind of stuff he could pull out in this point. So I say that he's probably going to be ranked like among like the top 10. Maybe he's going to be like the 10th place finisher with this test, or maybe like 8 or 7. I think 8 or 7 is probably good. So with that said, the day would finally end, and we would kind of jump cut to Izuku and Kirishima both talking things over after class, with them all being like, dude, did you see how sick that part was where I crushed the grip thing? And Kirishima would be like, yeah, but did you see the long jump? I totally aced that thing, and I didn't think I had that in me. So the two of them would be laughing about things, and it's at this point that Izuku would get a text from the girl that he had gotten the number of earlier, Momo. After receiving the text, she would say, hey, let's meet up at a coffee shop sometime. And Izuku's like, when? And she's like, maybe now? So all three of them meet up somewhere, and this is when they're like, I'm glad we can continue our talk from earlier. I'm so stoked that the three of us from the same middle school managed to make it into UA. Isn't that incredible? And all three of them just start yapping, talking. They're like, yeah, how have we never talked to each other before? She's like, oh, I mean, I guess I always was busy with dance school and a lot of after school activities. And Izuku's like, you think? She was always doing something in school. Don't you remember, Kirishima? So as the three of them would be talking things over, this is when we would pretty much just jump cut to the next day, and we would start covering the battle trial arc, which would be a lot different than the one that we get in the original, just due to us not having the dynamic of Deku and Bakugo hating each other and having that strange relationship. So by the time that All Might gets to the classroom and he hits the class with the I am here, everybody would obviously get extremely excited. But apart from that, this is when we would have the entirety of the test start to be explained by All Might, and he would be like, all right, so here's how this is gonna work. We're doing 2v2 battles, heroes, villains, here's the bomb, so yada yada yada, get to it. And then we would pretty much end up having Izuku and Uraraka paired up just like in the original. A part of me thought, hey, maybe I should have Kirishima be part of this, but I was like, nah, like let me let Izuku solo this test to show the difference in the strength that he actually has in this timeline. And then his opponents are still going to be Katsuki, Bakugo, and Ida. So yeah. So the battle would begin, and with Uraraka being like, all right, so how are we going to handle this? We would see Izuku looking at her and telling her to pretty much just stay behind his back and to call him if she needs anything at all. It's at this point that Izuku would turn the corner and a man, or not a man, but Bakugo, I don't know why I said man, and Bakugo would come turning the corner, blasting an explosion point blank in Deku's face. At this point, his entire head would practically explode, having been turned to magma and shooting off everywhere, with some bits and pieces burning Bakugo, as Uraraka would scream going, Deku! Only to see Deku's head reform and Bakugo to smirk, saying, so, you have that type of quirk. He would then try throwing more explosions at Izuku's direction. However, at this point, Deku's body would be able to tank everything, looking to Bakugo and telling him that there's not a thing his quirk can do to harm him, explaining that not only do his explosions not burn him, but the recoil of them don't do a thing to his actual body. And Bakugo would get pissed, stepping back, saying, what a neat quirk, but don't worry, I'll figure a way to kill ya. As he would shoot another explosion towards Izuku, just pretty much riling himself up so he could sweat more, preparing himself to shoot Deku with a full powered explosion, deciding that if he splatters Izuku a little bit here and there, he probably won't be able to reform in time, and he could potentially capture him with the capture tape, which Bakugo hated doing, but for this scenario, he guesses he'll let it slide, because nothing matters other than winning. So, once the actual gauntlet would be fully charged up, he would say, die, pulling the pin, as a massive explosion would go off in the corridor, and Izuku's body would actually like kind of all melt to the ground. His body would turn into like a magma puddle as it would melt through the actual like floor that they were on, and Uraraka not even being there anymore because she was looking for the bomb room would be gone. Izuku would have dodged that entire explosion, and suddenly his body would come right back from a different section, having melted through the actual walls and appearing behind Bakugo. Bakugo would turn going, what the? As a magma molten dragon would grab around Bakugo's like gauntlet, melting through it and slamming him into a wall. It's at this point that Deku's body would shapeshift, with his arm changing its properties and wrapping itself around Bakugo with the molten magma form. This would burn Bakugo, but not enough to like straight up kill him. So even though this was very much so hurting Bakugo and he was screaming out in pain, Izuku would capture him with his capture tape before letting him go, revealing that Bakugo had a couple of burns on his body. So with that being the case, Izuku would make his way up to the top area where he would spot Ida and Uraraka, and noticing that Ida's quirk entirely revolved around quick movement, Izuku realized that this is probably one of the worst matchups for him, since without actually being able to land an attack, there was not much he was going to be able to do. And so, turning his body into a lot of magma, he would start to cover the entire floor itself, making it so brittle that if you took one wrong step, the floor itself would collapse. And so with Ida knowing that he had no way of actually crossing towards Deku and trying to throw some sort of reciprocal burst kick or anything like that, Izuku, using his molten lava body properties, would start to pretty much move throughout the ground effortlessly, getting next to the bomb and saying checkmate. However, Ida would have used his reciprocal burst to shoot off towards Izuku in one last ditch effort. However, this is when Izuku's arm would transform into like a molten lava type shield, and it would block the blow, shocking Ida and the entirety of the class. What? How's he able to do that? The class would all say in excitement, as Izuku would end up pretty much winning this section, and we would then have All Might declaring, Hero Team wins! After this, we kind of just jump cut to the USJ arc because that's the next thing on the list, and we are going to just start everything off with the students inside of the USJ, right? They're all sitting there being told by the Pro Hero 13 everything that's going to be happening today, and as they're all paying attention, Izuku would kind of be nodding off, looking towards the direction where the water was at, thinking if there's any weakness that I do have, it's that. Because his body being submerged in water pretty much limits his quirk a lot. So even though, yeah, he could probably fight against a guy with a water quirk who could shoot attacks towards him, if they're like near a lot of water, or Deku somehow managed to be submerged, yeah, the dude is pretty much just wraps. Because at that point he can't use his quirk and he's limited to his own human movements, which would be kind of ironic considering what's about to happen. As Kirishima and Bakugo would lunge towards the direction of Kurogiri about to attack him, Deku would watch on, expecting that Kirishima's blow would land. However, suddenly from below his feet, a portal would open, with Izuku trying to extend his arm out in a dragon form to eat like a chomp at Kurogiri, his little metal part that he had noticed with the help of Kirishima and Bakugo. He would be teleported inside of water, his arm hardening, having turned into like a molten lava like hardened thing. As Izuku internally would think, oh crap. It's at this point that he would see a villain about to swim towards him. With Deku being scared, almost as though a shark was coming at him, he would try to swim away, but this is when suddenly a tongue would wrap around him, saving Izuku from the water. And Izuku making it back on top, he would start breathing heavily, going, I really owe you one. As Suyu would look at him and say, you don't do quite well in water, do you, Ribbit? As Izuku turns towards her and says, no, I kinda hate it. As Suyu would say that that's a good thing she was here because she was able to save him. And Izuku really turns to her again and goes, thanks, I really owe you my life. She's like, no, it's what heroes do. As she is all like, Ribbit, one more time. And then Izuku realizing that now that he's out of the water, he's gonna be able to pay back the villains for what they had done to him. So, Izuku charging up an attack would proceed to hold both arms out as from his body would come out lava that he would start shooting into the water, quickly heating up the temperature of the water, forcing the villains to literally start boiling alive, leading them to getting out of the water and giving Izuku just enough leeway to create 3 lava dragons. These creatures that Deku would have created would lunge towards their directions and start to capture the villains, giving them burns but knocking them out so quickly that even though it would kind of like char some parts of their skin, they will be fine with a bit of treatment. And after doing this, he would turn to Suyu, thanking her for saving him once again and saying he needs to get out there and help out the others. So jumping back into the boiling hot water that you could literally see bubbles coming out of and steam, he would swim back to shore with Suyu saying, whoa, he jumped into the water, when Mineta pointing out that his body's made out of lava, so there's no wonder he can do that. Then we would see Deku swimming to shore, where he would see Aizawa currently getting pummeled by the Nomu, and him noticing this would think that there's no way he's going to be letting his teacher have that happen. Izuku would think, it's now or never. In his mouth, he would gather up a bunch of hot molten lava, just kind of like filling up both of his cheeks with it, and then shooting it out like a spitball, similar to what Ame, the Mizukage, is able to do in the Naruto verse. So shooting it towards the Nomu's back, it would start to burn it, causing it to let out a screech and turn his attentions towards Izuku. Shigaraki would smirk, saying, so, you think you can play hero? Nomu, kill the brat. It's at this point that the Nomu would lunge towards Izuku, and Izuku would think it's about time I use my ultimate move, something that he had been working on with Kirishima for years. Molten lava eruption. From his mouth would shoot practically a pool of lava, which would continue shooting at the Nomu, who would try running straight after Izuku, eventually causing his entire body to just start literally disintegrating and being just burned and charred by the molten lava. This would destroy the Nomu, causing Shigaraki to watch on in despair. What? The Nomu was supposed to defeat All Might, and this brat defeated it with a lava quirk. Kurogiri, get us out of here. This is when we would see Shigaraki and Kurogiri disappearing from the USJ, as Izuku running towards Aizawa would say, Mister, are you alright? And we would then see Aizawa looking at him weakly and just kind of nodding his head, as Izuku would help Aizawa to his feet and All Might would arrive after the villains would have left. He would go on to help up cleaning up with the rest of the villains before then quickly disappearing because of his time limit, and we would have the entirety of the students having their accounts given on everything that had happened. As after this, we would get a 1-week training time skip where Kirishima and Izuku trained together, working on different attacks that they could create or trying to harden Kirishima, with Deku thinking, duh! He's just like kicking rocks around and he's just like, there's not anything cool that I've been able to come up with. All my attacks are so obvious and bland. He starts like ripping his hair out. He's like, if only I can think about something. If I don't, the rest of our classmates are gonna leave me behind, including you, Kirishima. Kirishima would be in a super hardened state with his body practically being charred by the lava output and him being like, all right, that's enough, Deku, as the molten lava would be retracted by Izuku, and Kirishima would look at him telling him that there's so many cool applications that Izuku could use. Has he ever thought about molten lava rain? Maybe a widespread rage attack where he's like spitting very, very small little lava bullets out at the air that eventually drop down on people like droplets. This could do a lot of damage, but probably won't kill people. Hopefully, he would say. Izuku hearing that would think, what? That's such a good idea! As at this point, Izuku would start practicing how to do that exact attack for the following week. As we would then finally jump cut to the students back at UA, with them all being told about the UA Sports Festival coming up. This is when the class would end after Uraraka would be like, "Are you excited?" And everybody's just like, "Yeah!" Then we would see everybody step outside, only to see all the people from the different classes to scope out the competition. This is when Bakugo would call everyone extras as he would walk on by, and Izuku would think that while Bakugo might have said that in a rude way, he might not be wrong. These guys are just stepping stones to his journey to becoming number one. So clenching his fist, Deku would walk on by with a different aura Kirishima has never felt before. It'd be intimidating. Izuku after this would be in the cafeteria with Kirishima asking what the heck that was about, as Izuku would explain that if he wants to become the number one hero, he's gonna need to take his training way more seriously and find a goal to actually chase after, not just being number one or rescuing a bunch of people. He needs to have an idea of justice that he's gonna live by. And so, after closing his eyes and thinking, Izuku would finally decide, "I'm gonna live by a code. Absolute justice. All villains will be put in jail. No exceptions." As we would have Kirishima looking at Izuku and thinking, "That's so cool." Alright, I'm recording this on a separate day, so if the flow of the story changes slightly just for the first 2 minutes, then please do forgive me for that. I had surgery and I wasn't able to record the video or continue doing this for a few days, way longer than I had anticipated would go, but yeah, sorry about that. Anyways though, to get back into the story, what I'm thinking would be a really cool element to address would be that whole absolute justice. And for most of you One Piece fans, I'm pretty sure you guys understood the reference to Akainu here. The only reason that I brought that up is just because of how cool I actually think the character of Akainu is. I mean, the dude was capable of standing toe to toe with Iceman himself, Admiral Okiji, which is just absolutely insane. I personally think Okiji should have won that fight just because ice and fire, or technically not even fire, but magma, but that's besides the point. Point is, I'm pretty sure that I left off during the sports festival arc, so let's go ahead and get into that before I continue just yapping endlessly. Okay, so jumping into the actual event itself, in this timeline, I believe that I had said that Bakugo was still the winner via a couple of points in this timeline. Or, well, technically Deku did rescue Uraraka, so actually, yeah, no, it's probably Deku. Deku would go up to the speech podium and would pretty much tell everybody to get hype and no matter what their quirk is, they can be a hero too. And he also encouraged all the other students being like, "Go plus ultra." So everyone's all riled up, they're all happy, they're hyped up, they're thinking, okay, I'm gonna give it my best shot. Even if I don't win, at least I know I gave it my best. So as soon as the cavalry race, or no, not cavalry race, but as soon as the race would begin, all of them are just hyped up. They're like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna show people what my weak quirk can do. Even if it's weak, I'm gonna use it and show off a bit." As soon as it starts, Todoroki would use his ice to freeze many, and I do mean many people in magma. Izuku, seeing this, would want to go off, but noticing that he believes now in absolute justice, he now believes that everybody in this little area should have an equal shot. So Deku, quickly transforming his body into a magma-like state, would start to pretty much sludge around the area, covering some of the ice around people's legs with lava. This would absolutely melt right through the ice, and then Izuku, formulating back into his normal body, would begin running towards the direction of Todoroki, using his lava on limbs to extend them, grabbing onto a robot as if it was some sort of grappling hook, and burning that part off simultaneously as he jumps and grapples off to the next point, doing a bit of a Spider-Man type method to swing around. And this would be extremely effective because Izuku was doing everything that he really wanted to in this moment. He was catching up to Bakugo and Todoroki, and though he never ended up coming in first place, just due to the fact that, hey, that beginning kind of messed him up a bit, Deku still ends up coming in third place, just behind Bakugo and Todoroki, who were still in this timeline competing for first place, obviously. That said, we would then get the cavalry battle section of the story, and thanks to Izuku not having won the 110 million point headband, Deku would actually do a lot better when it comes to getting teammates, especially from the people who he had actually helped save and gave them a chance to even finish up the exam in the first place. One of the people to go up to Izuku would be Shinso, but Izuku luckily would simply nod his head no because his team was already full and he had already had his squad. Shinso wanted him on his team just because he knew how strong he was and he wouldn't like to go up against him. But it is what it is. Shinso would walk away with a smirk on his face thinking, better not show off all my cards. As we would have Izuku and his team go on to pass, and let's just say that for his team, he's still going to be having the original characters, with the exception of Mei Hatsume. Maybe let's throw Teni Ida in there. So Ida, Uraraka. Oh wait. I am such a slowpoke. I forgot that I made Izuku and Kirishima friends plus Mina. So Kirishima and Mina are both going to be Izuku's partners alongside, I want to say Uraraka or Tokiyami. I don't know which one would do more sense, but I think for this particular section, we're going to go with Tokiyami for ultimate defense. As soon as the cavalry battle would begin, Deku, knowing that he has a plethora of points and probably would do just fine if he just kept this, would think that that's not what he wants. So the team would charge on towards the direction of some weaker teams, applying a simple strategy of, yeah, you know what, maybe I'm not going to get 1,000,000 points, but I am going to make it to the next event, and so is my team. They would make their way towards the direction of other contestants and rip them off of their headbands, with one of them accidentally getting burned by Deku's magma and turning towards him very, and I do mean very pissed. That would be Monoma, who in an attempt to copy Izuku's quirk once he made contact with them, would realize that this one was, well, a dud. Because Monoma couldn't copy the ability to turn his entire internal organ system into literal magma. So that ended up making, Monoma extremely mad. And as Izuku would pass with his teammates after having taken like 3 or 2 headbands, he would have created like a molten lava barrier around them. So anybody that even wanted to try to get up close to them would find a very difficult time doing so. Everybody, with the exception of Todoroki, who currently was simply trying to protect his own headband from Katsuki Bakugo. So whatever team you really want to say comes out on top doesn't really matter, but Deku passes onwards and we get the first match, which is Izuku versus Shinso. But before we get into that, we have to do a little bit of a brief flashback to the moment where Shoji, or that one tail guy, essentially walks up to Deku and tells him to pretty much be careful around that guy, that he's bad news. Izuku, catching a glimpse of this, would feel bad at the fact that now he has this tactical advantage, but what's he gonna do? Not use the information that he probably shouldn't speak to the guy? Yeah, no, that's not gonna happen. So as Izuku would be inside of the arena waiting for things to start, Midnight would shoot the starting pistol and say, "Come on boys, go at it for me." As the two of them would look at each other, and Shinso would say, "My, it must be awesome to have such an incredible quirk." As Izuku stares at Shinso blankly and just pretty much nods, Shinso would say, "Does he have me figured out?" As he would try to rile Izuku up, but nothing he says was getting to Izuku. After all, how could it? After years of being treated like garbage in his orphanage and struggling to make friends and being called villain and stuff like that, something like these weak little insults that Shinso was using wasn't doing anything. However, just before Izuku's attack would land, Shinso would say something that would strike close to home with Izuku, telling him that it must have been so nice to grow up with such an incredible quirk, everything always handed down to him getting by life just because of the incredible quirk that he has. And Izuku, before he actually lands this magma punch on Shinso, would actually stop, looking at him with the look of rage, before then stopping, realizing that he is a hero and he's not an executioner or a judge. So before he could actually land this attack that definitely would have put Shinso in the hospital, Deku would simply punch him square in the jaw, sending the dude flying out of the arena, with the entire crowd just being like, "Is that it?" As we would then jump cut to Izuku in the waiting room area, thinking back to what Shinso said, going, "That idiot has no idea what I went through with my quirk. Sure, it's awesome now because I trained with Kirishima, but back then, things weren't always so easy." As we would then get a clip of Shinso pretty much like walking, like standing by, and we would see Aizawa essentially recruiting him, telling him that he had seen great potential in his quirk, and then unfortunately what he's assessed is that his quirk wasn't able to stand out, especially in events like this against classmates. He would look at him and be like, "I assume your quirk has always been deemed villainous, but Don't worry about that. I'm pretty sure we've got a lot of characters in UA that are a lot more villainous quirk-wise than you, as we would have Shinso staring at Aizawa, and the two of them would end up forming the relationship that they end up having in the original canon. And so, we just jump straight into the second match, which is going to be an interesting one, considering the fact that it is going to be ice versus magma, which is going to be kind of sick, or ice and fire. But anyways, before the match would begin, Deku would be making his way towards the waiting area booth, like that has like some snacks, and as he was walking there, he would overhear a conversation between Endeavor and Todoroki. And what he would hear wouldn't necessarily shock Izuku, but it would kind of piss him off. He would hear Todoroki telling him that he's not his plaything or his pawn, and he's not going to be doing things his way. He would try to like establish some sort of like, I'm going to do things my own way, dad. My quirk is mine, not yours. You're not the boss of me. I'm only going to win with my ice. And Izuku hearing that would get pissed off, because now he realizes that Todoroki's only going to be fighting him at 50% strength, and it's all thanks to Endeavor, which sucks. Not that his fire was going to do anything to him because his body is completely heat resistant, but still, it's the principle of it. So as Izuku would walk by, he would stare at Endeavor, giving him a dirty eye, to which Endeavor would say, "What, kid? You got a problem with me? I'm the #2 hero, you know." As Izuku staring back at Endeavor would say, "Yeah, and I'm the guy who didn't ask," causing Endeavor to flare up his flames a little bit, as Izuku would say, "What? You gonna do something to me with those pitiful flames? How about you put those cute fireworks out and watch a real man use his quirk?" As he would walk on by Endeavor, and he would go, "Stupid generation of kids. They're all spoiled brats," grasping his hand together, as then All Might would come in and be like, "Yo, Endeavor, want to have a chat?" And so the two of them would kind of have their little encounter in the original, and then we just kind of jump cut to Izuku and Todoroki, with Deku knowing exactly how Todoroki intended to start this match off. So the second that Todoroki would send his ice towards Izuku, Izuku would send out a wave of magma, kind of like a tsunami thing, that would encase the entirety of its ice, melting some of it before it could actually get to Izuku, but not all the way, because at the halfway point, the ice began to actually thaw the temperature of the magma itself, and some magma lava would start pouring onto the arena. This would lead some Mentos to being like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, that's incredible." As, you know, President Mike would be like, "Wow, that's insane." And everybody watching on would just be like, "Wow, these two are incredible." So as the two of them would go on shooting ice and lava attacks towards one another, the two of them would eventually find that they're kind of at a bit of a weird stalemate type situation. The battle would go on for like 30 minutes, and one half of the arena would be hot, and the other half would be cold thanks to Todoroki and Deku. This would eventually lead Deku to getting pissed off and realizing that long range attacks with Todoroki probably not going to do something. But Todoroki, knowing that he doesn't exactly fight too well at close range, would try to keep things that way. However, eventually Izuku would manage to close the gap between the two of them by simply using his hottest magma-like state and walking straight through the lava, or the ice, sorry. So walking right through it as though he was like a bulldozer, just going through it like there was nothing in his way, nothing but straight up air, Deku would make his way face first with Todoroki. As reeling his fist back, Deku would proceed to create a magma fist, similar to what Akainu would have used to literally kill Ace and turn the dude into a donut. And then he would punch Todoroki in the gut, leaving a char mark on his stomach where the punch had actually landed. Fortunately, kicking back his magma release power, thanks to his training with Kirishima, as Todoroki would fall to the ground completely unconscious at not only the strength, but like the fire of that attack. His body couldn't handle it, even being made to resist fire a bit, thanks to his fireside quirk. And so, as Izuku would walk off, he would think, hopefully that doesn't leave a mark. It's not like the guy could use another, thinking to Todoroki's face. As he walks off the arena, he would stare at Endeavor, kind of giving him a look of, "Look, your son lost to me, and it's all your fault." He would then go on to signal to Endeavor that if he would have used his fire side, maybe things would have been more interesting. And Endeavor would be the only one to have caught that little signal that Izuku had actually given to him. And with Endeavor seeing that this Izuku kid was clearly disrespecting him, he would get pissed off, going, "You wanna go, kid?" As like firing his flames up, President Mike would be like, "Whoa, what an incredible father, wanting to fight to defend the honor of his only son." As Aizawa would chime in and say, "Mike, he has multiple kids." As Mike would stare at him and be like, yeah, multiple great kids. Go Endeavor. Can I get 3 cheers for Endeavor?" But like the arena is like mostly silent. A couple people are like, "Hey, cheer." But it kind of just sounds like crickets a little bit. You know, so those specific people that were like cheering for Endeavor because like they actually like him would kind of just feel so awkward in that moment. And so, with that being the case, Deku would advance to the third round, which would be against Tenya Ida, but because of the fact that he quits the whole thing, thanks to his brother getting absolutely massacred by Skane, we end up actually just jumping into the final match, which is essentially Izuku and Bakugo. And this would be a really interesting one because obviously now they're also limited in the area that they're fighting in, which is really bad for Todoroki, but kind of really good for Izuku. Because if Bakugo stays in the arena itself, like the four little like corners of it, then he has such limited space to work with, and Izuku could potentially trap him inside, which is exactly what he had thought of doing, because after seeing that Bakugo possessed the ability to essentially fly during the race that they had for the first event, Izuku was not about to let the guy have a single chance. So before Bakugo could even register what was going on, Izuku would throw a punch from above, extending his hand up into the air as it would shoot back down, similar to Luffy's Gum Gum powers, kind of like Mochi, right? Kind of like Katakuri. As Bakugo, seeing this attack come flying towards his direction, would widen his eyes, dodging out of the way as it would be too late. Izuku, using his quirk simultaneously with that, would have created a magma prison in there, which Bakugo could feel free to just absolutely destroy and clobber, but that probably won't go too well for him. And the only reason that there's light in there would be thanks to the little magma streams that would be providing light little bits of light. So Bakugo, seeing this, would think, so you decided to trap me in here so you could have a close range fight. Not the worst idea, but unfortunately for you, that also means that my explosives have a 100% hit rate. And Izuku's hearing that and looking at Bakugo would say, what does that mean? You can't hurt me, explosion boy. That's not going to be a problem. As he would reel both arms back and prepare himself, knowing that he was about to absolutely injure his bones, and then shooting the max power explosion that he could possibly handle, he would send Izuku, who was standing there cockily thinking nothing was going to happen, flying back near the edge of the ring, realizing that Bakugo's firepower was incredible, and Bakugo reeling from the pain, thinking that that was supposed to have taken him out. However, Izuku in the last moment had latched on to the actual bottoms and kind of fused his body in magma with the actual cement, was barely off the edge. Bakugo, seeing that, would realize that he's probably going to lose now, but there's no way he was going to back down from a fight, would tell Izuku to come on, clearly exhausted with both of his arms injured. Izuku, seeing this, feeling bad at the fact that this wasn't even going to be a real fight, would proceed to sit down on the ground as President Mike would be like, he's sitting. And it's at this point that Izuku would then be questioned by the crowd like, boo, boo, we want to fight, we want to fight. But Izuku, staring back at them, would say, hey, all you ignorant people need to pay attention. My opponent clearly injured himself with his last attack, and I'm not about to fight an injured opponent who can't even stand up for himself. Do you guys want a boring fight as a final? I didn't think so. So sit tight and give him about 3 minutes to recoup. So everybody in the arena would kind of be like, yeah, you know, he's right. With a couple of people saying, nah, fight him now, you won, that's his fault. But Izuku would say, absolutely not. And he would just kind of stand his ground and be like, yeah, that's not going to happen. I'm going to let the dude recuperate, and then I'm going to fight him at his absolute peak so that everyone knows that he didn't just beat him by luck. He absolutely decimated Bakugo in every way, shape, and form. So after the 3 minutes would be up, Bakugo would stare at him saying, nice and courteous of you to actually give me some time. Unfortunately for you, shooting an explosion at the ground and at the ceiling simultaneously, Izuku would burst through the magma, or Bakugo that was holding him back, into the air as he would think, AP shot, shooting multiple explosion blasts to the direction of Izuku, which would shoot right through his body, with Izuku staring at Bakugo saying, I don't know what you're intending on doing. But then two of them would hit Izuku in the head, causing his face to turn into magma. This means that for a few split seconds, he wasn't having his eyes, and that was perfect. Bakugo flies down, trying to land a super mega powered explosion once again, but Izuku knows that this was coming. I mean, he's not an idiot, right? This time he was expecting it. So, holding his hands out, Izuku would actually extend them both out to grab Bakugo before he could actually get into range and keep him away. this would burn Bakugo as it would simultaneously keep his distance, and then after Izuku's eyes would recuperate, Izuku would cover most of his body with the magma and harden it so that the temperature itself wouldn't burn him that much. It's kind of like a hot sauna, like a really hot sauna, but it would kind of just keep him encased inside of this thing that wouldn't even allow Bakugo to get out. At least is what it should have done, because thanks to the heat, Bakugo was able to sweat so much that he was able to shoot out such a powerful explosion that he ended up actually shattering the little prison he was encased of. And Izuku seeing this would be like, what? How did he? As Bakugo would fall to the ground unconscious because the recoil of the fact that the exploding thing that he exploded was like literally touching his skin. So then falling to the ground, Izuku would be declared the winner, with the crowd going wild saying, yeah, you know, it was kind of worth it. And Izuku being given the first place medal, with everybody going on about how incredible this year's first years are. We got Explosion Boy, the son of Endeavor, people with the anti-gravity quirks, vine quirks, electricity quirks. They're all the rave. Everybody's talking about Class 1A and how cool their abilities are, and even some of Class 1B's members. Some of them saying that one of the most boring matches, however, was that one match with Lava Boy and the purple-haired guy. And Izuku obviously knows why that's the case, but they don't, because they never got to find out what Shinso's quirk was. So, with that being the case, we would then end up having the next arc playing out, with the students returning to class and all trying to pick their hero names as well as internship opportunities. And Izuku would go on to pick a pretty basic hero name, Akainu. Why? I have no idea. It just kind of gives me, you know, a Kainu vibe. So with that being the case, he would name himself that, and then we would have the actual internship opportunity section, which, by the way, I have a question for you guys in the chat. Would you guys have preferred to click on a video with the title, "What if Deku was Aokiji's reincarnation," or had Aokiji's powers? Or would you guys rather have clicked on a title like, "What if Deku had a lava quirk"? Which one would have got your guys' attention way more? I'm just so curious to know, because sometimes when I'm titling these videos, I'm like, okay, like what do I go with? Do I go with the character that I'm actually basing the story off of, or do I name the video after their power? Because lately I've been noticing that when I name thing a quirk or something like that, these videos tend to do significantly better on the channel. Which, speaking of quirks and powers and stuff like that, be on the lookout, because pretty soon I'm going to be dropping What If Naruto Was Acnologia's Reincarnation, which is going to be an absolutely insane banger I'm going to be dropping to you guys, hopefully in the nearby future. So yeah, be on the lookout for that. But with this being the case, Izuku would now have to pick his own hero internship opportunity. And interestingly enough, I kind of paused the video for a bit just to think like, okay, what hero should Izuku realistically go an internship with? Because there's nobody with the lava quirk, and Endeavor sure as heck isn't going to be sending an internship opportunity to the person who literally beat his son. Yeah, that's not going to happen. So instead, I think what would be kind of sick is if Deku got an internship opportunity from the dragon hero Ryukyu, and he went over there and he like got to meet Nejire Hado and stuff like that. Maybe the two of them could like hit it off, just because Nejire, like, she's just such an outgoing, bubbly personality, also kind of stupid, and Izuku would be able to kind of like be there and like just talk to her. And obviously, because, you know, he probably would be attracted to Nejire, given the fact that not only is she his upperclassman, but she is pretty, canonically speaking. The dude would just kind of be sitting there and he'd be like, oh, like, oh, look at her, like, da, 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 you know, and like, they, you know, he's trying to flirt with her. She has no idea what's going on. And Izuku's like being taught by Ryukyu, like hero things and stuff like that, teaching them that in order to be a pro hero, you have to be quick, you have to be precise. And she starts pretty much training him and teaching him all the things she had to learn in her early years. So Izuku's hero opportunity would be a great one. However, all the while everybody else would be having incredible hero internship agencies and stuff like that, the one person who would have a horrible time at his would be Tenya Ida, because the dude was out for murderous revenge against the pro hero against the hero killer Stain. I don't know what I'm on today. Anyways, but yeah, with that being the case, he ends up pretty much dying, because like, come on now, the dude was literally out for blood. And then after the students would return to UA, they're hit with like the most unfortunate news. Your upperclassman Ida is dead. And they would pretty much end up teaching them that this is why you don't go after revenge, and why, as hero students, they're not prepared to take on the world. As physically strong and imposing as they may believe themselves to be, they're not. So with Izuku realizing that this hero killer was literally responsible for the death of his class rep, the guy who like he was actually friends with and he liked them, right? Like, Ida may have been annoying at times, but he was a nice guy, and he was gonna be a great hero one day, saving thousands of lives. But the hero killer stole that opportunity from him, and in turn, not only killed Ida, but the millions of people he would end up saving one day. And as Izuku would think about that, he would think that this criminal must be brought to justice, but not the normal kind. Death. And so, as Izuku would sit there, the temperature of the classroom would rise, with Aizawa looking at Izuku and using his erasure quirk on him. He would tell him, "Kid, you better turn your quirk off." As Izuku would look at Aizawa and just be like, "Sorry about that," erase your head, pretty much telling him that he was just thinking about his classmate, and he got upset. The classmate would go silent since, it had been a bit of time since that had happened, and Kirishima going over to Deku would be like, "Hey man, it's all good, like, it's just unfortunate, but our man Need is watching us from above, so let's go plus ultra and be great heroes." And Izuku, feeling Kirishima's hardened hand on his shoulder, would look up, realizing that the only reason his hand wasn't burning was because of the fact that his hand was hardened. Kirishima knew him after all. So Izuku, staring at his good buddy, would nod, telling him that he's right, as he would chill out and ask Aizawa if he could be excused for a couple of minutes. Aizawa would nod his head, knowing that this is a distraction to the class, and then after class would be over, the two of them would probably have some discussion, with Aizawa telling him that he understands his frustration, that he is just as frustrated, and he's been trying to locate the hero killer to see if he could throw off some tips to his other hero colleagues so that they could capture him. But for now, they have no information on the hero killer, and he's still out on the loose. He would say that from now, they're assuming that he's probably left Hosu City, just due to the fact that the number of victims that follow Stain have been very consistent. And so Izuku, hearing that, would wonder what the next city is that Stain's gonna go towards, which will probably eventually end up being the one that Izuku's at. And I know most of you thought I was building to that, but nah, we're gonna be jumping straight into the next arc, which is going to be I think it's the finals, right? I think it's the finals. So yeah, Izuku ends up having to study for that, and because he's, significantly smart, maybe he does just as well, if not a little worse, than the Izuku that we have in the original, so that's cool. And then we have the actual, hero portion, which is going to be, the person that they're all going to have to fight against. Just because I see absolutely zero reason for Izuku to go up against anybody else, we're going to actually have him go up against All Might. Wait, no! I think I just figured out the perfect matchup. Kirishima and Izuku have been friends this whole time, so let's swap Sato and Izuku, and the two of them are going to be changing opponents. Since Cementos has a quirk that actively probably is going to allow him to try to counter what Izuku can do mostly. Another good opponent for him might have actually also been Aizawa, but who's counting? So with that being the case, Sato goes in with Bakugo, and because it's not Izuku and he doesn't have access to the full counting powers that Deku does, they end up getting absolutely clapped, which is kind of just funny. But as for Izuku and Kirishima, thanks to the camaraderie that the two of them have, and Izuku's kind of working as the brains of this whole operation, Izuku would note that Cementos' quirk is probably going to be some difficulty for him, considering the fact that what's he going to do? Just melt Cementos and kill him or something like that? He's not actually able to do that. To which Kirishima would say, "I know, dude. Isn't it insane how much more powerful quirks like ours would be if we were able to actually kill people?" And Izuku, hearing that from Kirishima, would be a bit shocked, but he would think about Stain in that moment, going, "Yeah." As he would then stare at him, and Kirishima would be like, "You good, bro?" To which Deku, looking at him, would be like, "Yeah, let's do this." And so the two of them would get ready to face off against Cementos, with Izuku having created a very easy strategy. He would create a magma clone, something that he had been working on this entire time, and it would work as a distraction for Cementos. Cementos not even noticing that Izuku wasn't even there, and the person he was fighting with the magma, with Kirishima and Izuku both rushing at him from a facing forward perspective, and all Cementos had to do was continue producing cement endlessly to keep them away. This is when suddenly, as Cementos was pushing back the lava of Izuku, Deku, coming out from his left side, his blind spot, would proceed to create a little blob-like bubble thing around Cementos, telling him that that's checkmate. As Cementos would see that his student has definitely got him, he'd be like, "How? There's no way that you should be able to be at two places at once." With Izuku smirking and being like, "Kid, what can I say? Guess Ryukyu taught me a lot during my internship." Cementos would smile, knowing that his student was advancing, and he would say, "I yield." As the two of them would end up passing, and Kirishima leaping into the air would be like, "Yeah, let's go!" Be like, "Well, I didn't really do anything, Izuku, but thanks for passing me." As he would have worked as a very good distraction during that situation, but Izuku would look at Kirishima and be like, "Nah, man, that plan doesn't work without you. You were distracting him and making it seem like me and you were both truly the the ones going after him. He had no time to even think up about me being a clone and coming in to actually defeat him. And Kirishima was like, yeah, I guess you're right, man. As the two of them would kind of just look at each other, fist pump with Izuku's magma hand, and Kirishima would be like, dude, turn your heat off. Izuku would look at Kirishima and be like, oh, you're right. As the two of them would eventually just kind of sit in class, chilling and stuff like that. And then we would get the news of the forced training camp arc, which is kind of where we're going to just be jump skipping to everybody on the school bus making their way there, as they would all make it to like a strange ledge looking place. And as they would onlook the area, they're all just like, it's beautiful. Seeing the trees, the greenery, like even like a waterfall nearby, and then miles and miles away from a distance, noticing the actual camp. Some of them would question and be like, yo, why are we here if the camp is all the way there? And Aizawa would smirk, followed by the Wild Wild Pussycat team member to throwing them all off the cliff. This is when they would go on to inform them that they're going to be needing to make it their way there by themselves. And be careful with the mud beasts because they're going to be ravaging through the forest, and try to make it there before this time because if not, you're not going to eat any food. The Wild Pussycat member would say as they would all look onward and seeing these monsters, they'd be like, great. Deku, noticing that these are targets that he can go fully all out on and doesn't need to hold back, would smirk, thinking to himself that finally he can cut loose. And so, going on to decimate them with his lava quirk, Deku and the rest of the class would arrive to the actual place about 40 minutes sooner than he can in, just because he's a bit stronger than obviously full Calling Izuku, but one man isn't exactly going to be changing everything for them. So yeah, I think a 40-minute difference maker is kind of a big deal. So with that being the case, they would get there a little sooner than they expected, and they'd be praising them for how quickly they did it, not really knowing that the only reason that happened was because, well, Izuku's kind of him. So as Izuku would make his way there, he would notice a little boy and he'd be like, who's he? With the little kid right next to him. Kuro would literally punch Deku in the nuts in this timeline, but what's hilarious is that when he would reel his arm back, his hand would be charred. He just punched Lava Man. There was no way that he was about to come out of that without having gotten sunburns. And Mandalay, noticing that her little bratty nephew had just gotten burned, would feel so bad for him. And also would be like, damn, like he had it coming. What am I supposed to do? Like defend Koda? He's the one who tried hitting him and he ended up getting hurt. Koda would be so mad at Izuku and he would like literally hate him during the whole camp. That is, until we would end up getting the really cool Muscular versus Deku fight, which is still going to be happening thanks to the Vanguard Action Squad still pulling up. Which means that just like in the original, the students themselves have a significant amount of time to train, with Izuku making say a clone technique, where not only is Izuku working on having one clone but multiple clones, because that's something he can struggle with because it's kind of difficult to keep the shape of the magma to actually look human. And now that he's not only doing it with one clone, but with multiple clones, 6 to be exact, it is a lot more difficult. But it does pack a lot more of a punch, and if he doesn't actually want the clone to look like him, it's a lot easier. It kind of just looks like a magma mushy-like version of him that just kind of looks like a human shape, and then he's able to shoot massive scale attacks from them, which is extremely impressive. But yeah, with that being the case, Izuku, noticing that Koda would be gone at around the 4th or 3rd day that they're at the camp, would go over to follow him where he had seen him walk by. And after looking through the forest for a bit, he would eventually find Koda as he would have a cold plate of curry, or kind of like lukewarm, and seeing Koda was crying, he would feel bad. Seeing his bandaged up hand thanks to, his little magma body, he would feel more bad, and then walking over towards Koda, he would say, hey, I brought you this. Koda, seeing Izuku, would wipe the tears off his face and be like, I don't care, get lost, I don't need a hero. As Izuku, looking at Koda, would feel bad, and he would just sit next to him being like, kid, like, what's the deal? I'm not gonna pry into your situation if obviously you don't want me to, but I'm so confused. I mean, I know what it's like to cry by yourself when you're at this age. It sucks. So why not talk to somebody instead of sitting here like a loner? Koda would get mad at Deku, but then he would just start bawling, breaking down, because in reality, he did want someone to talk to. But how was he going to tell his aunt all the emotions going through his head? A stranger felt easier to talk to. So, looking at his hand, then at Izuku, and feeling a bit annoyed, he would just tell Izuku everything. With Izuku being like, damn, like, kid, I'm sorry. Like, I never got to meet my parents, so I don't know what that's like. And Koda, hearing that Izuku didn't even get to meet his mom and dad, would be like, damn, and I got to meet them and I still act this bratty. But as they're both having like a little bit of like a heart-to-heart moment, this is when suddenly a massive cloaked figure would come nearby, and it would be none other than Muscular, arriving at the scene on some like weird time and being like, huh, looks like it's my lucky day. I found a couple of weaklings that I'm gonna get to crush like bugs. As Izuku turning towards his left, noticing Muscular in his gigantic like muscle form, seeing a fist coming towards their direction, Izuku quickly turning his body into magma and grabbing Koda and tossing him to the other side of the actual like lookout section of the mountain, would then be hit full on by the blast, as it would char Muscular's like hand, which is covered in muscle fibers, which is a horrible matchup for him. They would all burn off, as Izuku would then stare at Muscular, telling him that he made a terrible mistake, and that if he's the brawler, that Izuku's gonna enjoy being his worst nightmare. Looking to Koda, he would tell him to get lost, as noticing that this man actually fits the description of the person who was actually the one who killed the water hose heroes. Izuku would grit his teeth going, "You make me sick. You killed the kid's parents and now you want to come after him? That's unforgivable." He would stare at Muscular, and in one fell swoop, Izuku hardening his hand and turning it to magma, he would punch straight through him, turning the dude into Ace. Muscular standing there would be like, "Ha! Let's go all out with our quirks. No holding," but he's just dead. The dude looks down at his stomach, and then he's like, "No fair. Heroes don't kill." But Izuku looks at him, and he essentially just pours magma on Muscular's body, leading to his entire body to disappear, and Izuku able to just say that he beat him up, but he must have got away. It's not like Izuku's stupid enough to just confess, "Hey, I blatantly murdered a villain because I considered him not worthy of saving." So yeah, after doing this, Izuku would pretty much catch up to Koda, who had ran away, thanks to the fact that he had noticed that Izuku was going to be able to hold his own. This is when Izuku, seeing Koda, would help him take him towards the direction of Aizawa, as he would go through the forest and help the rest of his classmates out, specifically Tokiyami, who at the moment was struggling to keep Dark Shadow at bay. So once he would arrive, using his magma ability and the light that comes off of it, Izuku would be able to actually stop Tokiyami from going nuts, and this is when they would end up running into Todoroki and Bakugo. Izuku shooting a blast of magma at the direction of the Moonfish, the villain with the weird teeth quirk, as they would take him out in his entirety, and then the group would continue moving forward, as eventually two people would be kidnapped: Izuku Midoriya, who has a villainous quirk, and Katsuki Bakugo, for his fiery attitude that he would have displayed during the sports festival. The two of them being turned into orbs thanks to Izuku not noticing, or Bakugo, would then end up finding themselves inside of the League of Villains hideout. And it'd be in this moment that Izuku opening his eyes and seeing that he was like fully like turned into like an orb, and he was being held by Dabi, who could burn him at any moment, and realizing that Bakugo's there too, he would have to bide his time. Izuku would remain silent for the entirety of this period that they were trapped, or at least the majority of it, as we would then have Shigaraki coming up to the two of them and saying, "So heroes, I know you wanted to go down the path of the heroic, but what if you became villains? I mean, what has this world really done for you two anyways? What's so great about being a hero? Join the League of Villains, and with us, you can thrive in the new age to come. With your powers, we'll be more than unstoppable." But Izuku, hearing that, would be about to cut him off when suddenly Bakugo would chirp in saying, "If you think I'm going to become a villain, you're damn retarded, because there's no way I'm abandoning the way of the hero. Heroes never lose, and that's not going to be changing." Bakugo, then noticing that he's very much outmatched and can't do anything, would realize that if there's one person who could probably handle all of these guys simultaneously, it would low-key be Izuku. So Izuku giving Bakugo this look of like, "Dude, like, I need your help, and I need it now because this is not going to work without you," would essentially like just like have Bakugo nod at him, as Izuku would stare at Kurogiri for a long period of time, then back at Bakugo, kind of signaling like, "If you attack somebody, attack him and I'll take the rest on." This is when Bakugo like would nod, and the two of them would have this plan of like, "Okay, the second that we're free, we're going to take care of that." So Bakugo, being the one that doesn't have a magma quirk and is less threatening at the moment, would then be unchained, as he would say, "Come on, let me remove these shackles from you. You're guests after all. Bakugo would then push Shigaraki back with an explosion, as he would then shoot off towards Kurogiri, grabbing him by his metal and telling the villains that if they don't step back, he's gonna blow Shigaraki to Kingdom Come. And Dabi, about to shoot his cremation flames at their direction, would suddenly feel lava go straight through his body. As through his chest, magma would have melted right through him, Izuku's fist having punched right through, and Bakugo staring off in shock, just like, Deku, how did you? Or like, why? As Izuku would then essentially look at Bakugo, telling him, don't let the warp villain go. Shigaraki would rush at Izuku, pissed, as magma, using his repulsive force, would shoot Deku through the building. This is when Deku would get back up, having turned his body back into magma, as he would then lunge towards the direction of each of them, creating 6 magma clones that would all just destroy the room, covering the entirety of the area with magma, so much so that it was like they were in a volcano, or like an area where like liquid volcano magma was just seeping in, and they had only seconds left to live. Izuku would slaughter all of them, burning them all to a char, as Kurogiri would be the final one left, and Izuku would walk over to him with Bakugo being like, Izuku, you killed them all. That's not what heroes are supposed to do. But Deku, not caring, would kill Kurogiri as well, then turning to Bakugo, telling him that this is the third villain offense that these guys have made. First, they attacked them at the USJ. Then, they attacked their forest camp. And third, they tried turning promising heroes into villains. And that was unforgivable. Bakugo, looking at him, would tell him that he has no right to be judge and executioner. But Deku would look at him, telling him that he had sworn on absolute justice. So whether the heroes want him on their side is going to depend on how they react. This is when, very shortly after, the heroes would arrive, as All Might would punch through the roof, the side, being like, pizza delivery, and seeing the carnage left behind by Izuku, they would be stunned, like, how did this happen? Deku would go on to explain that he had to do it. They were all going to kill him, so Izuku, trying to protect Bakugo, would have used a full-on magma attack and had to kill them all. And so All Might, looking at Bakugo, would just like see if he's like telling the truth. And Bakugo, knowing that he probably shouldn't lie about Deku, or he probably shouldn't tell the truth about what really went down, would say, yeah, they tried killing me and he stepped in the way. We were barely able to hold them off, but the last one that we didn't have to kill ended up trying to get away, and Deku was already on a mode. So with Izuku, you know, like looking at them, he would like look at them and tell them that he's sorry, but it had to be done. And it's in this moment that All Might would apologize for what he had to go through today, telling him that this is the worst case scenario for a hero and to not worry, that this will all go under wraps. Bakugo, hearing that, would like kind of wince at the fact that a hero like that is going to be on the streets, who's genuinely going around killing people if he deems them to be evil enough. But not caring, because at the bare minimum he's safe and he's going back to UA, Bakugo would just kind of stay silent, as an air of just like weirdness would always surround Deku and Bakugo during their entire time at UA, which wouldn't be much longer, considering the only 2 big events that are left in the story would be the hero, or not the hero, but the villain overhaul, which is actually going to be taken out in its entirety by Mirio, just due to the fact that in this timeline, I just don't see Izuku returning with Mirio when it comes to the hero agency, so he's not even going to be part of the Tsunade action squad that goes to take out Overhaul. However, one good thing to come out of this what if is that All Might ends up giving one for all to Mirio, so Overhaul isn't a problem, considering that he's facing the worst opponent possible, somebody who he can't decay, which are Overhaul, seeing as that would have been the case with either Izuku or Mirio. And because I just don't see a world where Mirio isn't able to defeat Overhaul, that villain is pretty much taken care of by somebody else, and Izuku would actually go on a hero internship with the pro hero Ryukyu, leaving the final thread to like kind of deal with being the infamous villain. I was gonna say Lady Nagant, but yeah, no, that's not it. Gentle Criminal, that's the name I was looking for, Gentle Criminal. And because the dude is, well, kind of like a filler villain, if I'm being honest, I think that that's honestly a good spot to leave everything off on. because without having All For One, essentially manipulate Shigaraki into becoming his like clone or his second body, he doesn't get strong enough to even pose a threat to All Might. And because Mirio is way stronger than All Might at this current moment in high school, even the big bad of the story himself is essentially going to be taken out not even by Zuko most likely, but either All Might in his final fight, which happens more later on down the line. Actually, no, most likely Mirio, which means that the whole entire story just kind of gets wrapped up in a neat little bow right here. So ladies and gentlemen, let me know what you guys thought about Lava Quirk Deku. I know it was a fun one. I had an absolute blast at the sports festival. And honestly, even with that final little fight, it was just kind of a fun change of pace to do one of these videos without having scripted them or thinking about it too much. I don't know, I just had a blast during this one, and I hope you guys did too. So shout out to the person who commissioned this video. Azuma, you're great, you're the best. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I love each and every single one of you guys. Leave a like on the video for the algorithm because I really need the help. And it has been your boy Xehther, and I am signing out. Peace.